This is a public road. It's the world's supercar testing grounds, and it's a racetrack so dangerous that it was banned by Formula 1. The Nurburgring is one of the world's most famous racing circuits, but it took nearly 100 years of trial and tribulation to get there. So let's dig into the world's automotive benchmark and see how a simple German experiment later became the Green Hell. I'm Guff, this is Albon, let's get started. The story of the Green Hell begins 100 years ago. Germany was quickly becoming a global automotive powerhouse, and so naturally they wanted to race cars. But in 1904, the first ever major cup race in Germany was won by a Frenchman in a French car, which in the early 20th century was an embarrassment that Germany could not stand for. The German carmakers realized quickly that unlike the English and the French, Germany had no dedicated place to test new vehicles. And this put them at a major disadvantage in the arms race that was the personal automobile. So a plan was made to give Germany the tools to prevent this embarrassment from ever happening again. A dedicated circuit, home base for German manufacturers in the Eifel Mountains. A place where they could develop their cars and hone their racecraft. But something happened that stopped the Germans in their tracks. World War I. And well, we all saw how that went for Germany. And by the 1920s, Germany's economy was at its lowest ever point, with unemployment at its highest and its currency completely worthless. So, as you can imagine, building a racetrack was far from anybody's priority. Well, that's where you're wrong. As it turns out, a racetrack was exactly what Germany needed. You see, Germany still had their auto industry, and a state-of-the-art racing circuit would allow the German car makers to double down on innovation. Plus, the building of a circuit on this magnitude would provide employment for thousands of struggling German citizens. And on top of it all, Germany would finally have a dedicated racetrack to host the world's racing drivers, a way to reconnect with the global sporting community. So in the early 1920s, the ADAC, or Allgemeine Deutsche Automotive Club, along with the mayor of Cologne, agreed to the Nurburgring project. It was to be a dedicated racetrack by Germans for Germans. And in its inception, it was designed to be one of the most grueling racetracks in the world to produce some of the best cars in the world. And so they got to work, and just a few short years later, the Nurburgring was officially born. In its original form, there were two full track layouts. There was the Nordschleife, which translates to North Loop, and the Südschleife, which translates to South Loop. The Nord was 14.18 miles long, and the Südschleife was a much shorter 4.8 miles. But if you wanted to get really crazy, both loops connected to make the infamous 17.6 mile track known as the Gesamtstraße, or whole loop. And to top it all off, the entire circuit was located around the medieval castle of Nuremberg among the Eifel Mountains. And being in the mountains, this circuit curved and moved along with the landscape, a course that truly tested every aspect of driver and car. It had around 180 turns in total, and with the speed that drivers could achieve, forgetting any one of those corners could prove tragic. The rest of the automotive world was paying close attention to what the Germans were building, and after seeing the track layout, they elected to immediately make the Nürburgring a Grand Prix circuit. But little did the racing world know, it wasn't going to be just another circuit. This was going to be the most dangerous Grand Prix circuit in the world. The first ever race took place on June 18th, 1927. It was a motorcycle race on the Nordschleife, which was won by Tony Ullman riding a English 350cc Velocette. But what everyone was really waiting for was scheduled for the very next day, the Nürburgring's first automobile race. It was a tremendous race with some of the best drivers in the world competing. But in the end, it was Rudolf Caracciola behind the wheel of his supercharged Mercedes-Benz S that took home the gold. A triumphantly German win for the organizers and proof that their home track was paying dividends. Immediately after that first race weekend though, the Germans did something absolutely insane. They opened the Nürburgring up to the public. That's right, for just a few bucks, you could take one of the toll roads leading onto the track and drive it yourself. Even to this day, the Nürburgring remains open to the public, but more on that later. All you needed to get on the track was a car and presumably some life insurance. Why life insurance? Well, because just a year after opening day, the Nürburgring took its first life. when a gentleman named Chenik Junek crashed at the Breedscheid corner, the lowest altitude corner of the circuit, in his Bugatti Type 35B. It was an awful thing to happen, of course, but news of this terrible ordeal came and went pretty quickly, because people were far more interested in the new speed record seemingly being set with every subsequent lap. The record for the full course was set by a man named Louis Chiron, who averaged 72 miles per hour the entire lap. And if you haven't already made the connection, he was driving a Bugatti. That record still stands today and will probably stand forever, because just a couple of years later, in 1929, the Gesamtstrecke Layout hosted its last major race. From 1930 on, every major race was to be held on the Nordschleife, largely for safety reasons. And so it would be on the Nurburgring Nordschleife that Germany would make its racing known around the world. What started as a Hail Mary to boost a failing economy quickly became the most technical, most demanding racetrack ever, one that was adored and respected around the globe. But just as all these new records at the ring were being achieved, racing came to a screeching halt altogether, because Germany invaded Poland and the Second World War began. Just like how this ad break began, thanks to ShipStation.
Shipping costs are killing us! Figure it out or you're done.
This is Bob, and Bob is in a tough spot. Shipping costs are killing his merch company. What Bob needs is ShipStation. ShipStation gets you discounts of up to 84% on USPS and UPS shipping rates. And when it comes to small business, every bit of savings helps. Plus, with their easy-to-use dashboard, you can manage orders and returns, automate shipping routines, print shipping labels, and easily compare rates and delivery times to optimize every shipment. The best part of it all, Bob got a 60-day free trial at shipstation.com/Albon, and now he's joined the over 130,000 other companies that grow their e-commerce business with ShipStation. So if you're looking to take your business to the next level, be like Bob and go to shipstation.com/Albon. That's shipstation.com/Albon for your 60-day free trial. Now back to the video. That war raged on for 6 years, and it wasn't until 1947 that racing would return to the Eifel Mountains. But the racing world was quick to bounce back. By 1951, the Nurburgring joined the Formula One calendar as the German Grand Prix. F1 races were to be held on the Nordschleife, and thanks to the treacherousness of that track and the rapidly increasing speed of F1 cars, it proved to be a very popular race. Growth was abound at Germany's famous track, and then the inevitable happened. The same thing that happens to so many races that we cover. The circuit was becoming too dangerous. F1 cars were struggling to stay on the track. The surface was bumpy, especially on the high-speed straights. Corners were sharp and overwhelming. Some turns were even blind. Add to that the fact that the F1 cars were getting faster and faster every single year, and many people were beginning to think that the Nürburgring was just too unpredictable of a track, and the growing number of deaths was certainly backing that up. The race organizers made some adjustments, like in 1967 when the Hohenrenn straightaway was given a chicane, but that was hardly enough. And in 1968, after his victory in crippling fog and rain, Sir Jackie Stewart called the ring the Green Hell, a name that would curse the Nürburgring forever. Year after year, there seemed like there was no way to truly make the German Grand Prix confidently safe. And eventually, the drivers and racing teams all decided that they couldn't race at the Nürburgring until ample changes were made. So in 1970, the F1 Grand Prix was canceled. To their credit though, the race organizers continuously kept up with improvements to the track's safety. After being named the Green Hell, they decided to add some more safety barriers. Some corners were removed to make the track straighter, and they paved away the worst bumps to stop cars from going airborne. Yeah, cars used to go airborne. And with these new changes, the race returned in 1971. But it was all in vain, because just 5 years later, by 1976, it all came to an end. As more and more safety concerns were being addressed, more and more dollars were being spent to maintain the track. The size of the track alone called for 5 times as many marshals and medical staff as any other Grand Prix on the schedule. And then of course, TV coverage was a nightmare. Fans were missing important parts of the race in network blind spots. So the announcement was made. The 1976 Grand Prix would be the last F1 race ever on the Nordschleife. And it would end up being that final 1976 Grand Prix that would cement the hellish nature of the Nurburgring forever. You see, Niki Lauda was the reigning F1 champ, and he was also the fastest man around the Nurburgring with a 6-minute 58-second lap record the year prior. But on the day of the 76 Grand Prix, he didn't even want to race. Rain lashed down onto the track, thick fog enveloped every corner. So before that last race, he stood up at the drivers' meeting and argued that the conditions were too harsh, and he asked the other drivers to boycott the race with him. But when they went to vote and all the hands went up, it became clear the side to boycott the race would lose by just one vote. And so the race would continue. And reluctantly, Lauda suited up to keep his championship points lead going. On just the second lap of the race, Lauda in his Ferrari took the fast left-hand kink, only for the car to snap oversteer. His Ferrari violently rammed into the metal barriers on the right side of the track, and then erupted into flames. And as his car bounced back onto the track from the impact, he was hit by another driver, Brett Lunger. Niki Lauda's car quickly became an inferno, and he was trapped inside. 4 other drivers stopped immediately and ran to him, pulling him out of his burning car. But even though his fellow drivers were there, because of the size of the track, the fire marshals and the medical team were still on their way to the accident. Niki Lauda's worst fears before the race came to reality. He was airlifted to a hospital where he battled for his life for days. Thankfully, he survived, but this was the final nail in the coffin. Yes, the Nürburgring was too big, too expensive for a Grand Prix, but like Niki Lauda tried to make people understand, it was also just too dangerous. And the 1976 Grand Prix would be the last time that F1 would ever race at the Nürburgring Nordschleife. But to the credit of the Germans, they didn't just sit back and watch the rest of the world race. No, they came up with a comeback plan. A plan to build a new circuit, one specifically designed for Grand Prix racing. It was a major undertaking. A new dedicated Grand Prix circuit would mean that the entire Südschleife would have to be demolished. And so, demolish it they did, and this new track was to be named the GP Strecke, and it had all the bells and whistles needed for an exciting, but perhaps less deadly circuit. They finished construction in 1984, and to welcome motorsports fans to the new circuit, and perhaps to demonstrate that it also wasn't going to murder the drivers, they held an inaugural exhibition race with the world's greatest drivers, and they called it the Race of Champions. And this race was a massive success. The course was hugely entertaining, a challenging circuit for drivers, but with enough space and runoff to keep them safe. The winner of the race was none other than the man who dominated racing in the 1980s, Ayrton Senna. And the world was impressed with this new evolution of the Nürburgring. And so F1 decided to return to the new track just 1 year later as the 1984 European Grand Prix. But just as Grand Prix racing seemed to have made its triumphant comeback at the ring, the F1 organizers and the track promoters failed to reach a long-term agreement. There were arguments about lack of profitability on the new track as well as the public's reception. And although the new track was still called the Nürburgring, it didn't have the same cult following that the old Nordschleife had created. At the same time, FISA, the F1 governing body, had changed their policy to allow for long-term contracts with one circuit per Grand Prix. This meant that the German Grand Prix, which had moved to Hockenheim, would have to choose which track they would stick with. And well, the Nürburgring lost, and Hockenheim ended up winning the contract for the next 20 years. It was a heartbreaking result. The track that they had just built for the Grand Prix was rejected by those who organized it. 20 years they would have to wait for another shot at becoming the home for German racing. But it turns out the Nürburgring GP Strecke would somehow make its way onto the calendar just 10 years later. And that's because in 1995, German interest in motorsports skyrocketed thanks to one man, Michael Schumacher. In 1994, Schumacher became the first F1 driver to win the Drivers' Championship under the German flag. And suddenly, for FISA, a second GP in Germany was totally doable. But the German GP name was taken by Hockenheim, so the 1995 race at the ring became known as the European Grand Prix. And well, it was a huge success for the Nurburgring and Germany as a whole, but as the years went on, the same race would end up being called the European Grand Prix, the German Grand Prix, the Luxembourg Grand Prix, and even the Eiffel Grand Prix. It was odd. The GP Stecco was a part of the Nurburgring whose identity was constantly being muddled through marketing and legal issues. But through all that drama, there was still the Nordschleife, quietly staying true to its roots in the background while the GP track fought for its place in the motorsports world. And even though many major races transitioned to the new track in the 80s, the Nordschleife still continued to host its fair share of races. Things like touring car races, sports car races, the 24 Hours of Nürburgring, but perhaps most importantly, sports car development today is still measured around one metric: the Nordschleife lap time record. Some of the greatest production cars ever made created their marketing hype at the Nordschleife, because if you were fast at the ring, you were probably fast anywhere. Porsche GT2s and GT3s were developed on the Nordschleife. BMW would introduce their M cars to the world only after showing off the lap times at the ring. And of course, we can't forget Mercedes-Benz, a company so vital to the Nordschleife's success, who have continued to test their cars for nearly a century on that track. But the Nürburgring isn't just a testing ground for Germany's homegrown cars. The rest of the world's automakers came to the green hell as well. Like the Mark IV Toyota Supra, the first Toyota to ever be fully tested at the Nürburgring. Then of course, Nissan developed the R35 GTR here and broke record after record. Even Hyundai, a South Korean car maker, developed an entire facility in Germany near the ring to develop its entire N line of cars on the Nürburgring. And even if your favorite sports car wasn't developed on the Nürburgring, it probably still tried to set lap records here. The Huracan, Aventadors, Dodge Vipers, McLaren 600 LTs and 720Ss, the Corvette Z06, Camaro, even the Pagani Zonda had to set a record on the Nordschleife before being released to the public. And of course, I wouldn't be me if I didn't mention the greatest car of all time, the Lexus LFA, which of course was available as a Nürburgring edition. But beyond sports car development, the Nordschleife continues to stay true to its roots, the people. The Nürburgring project started as a way to bring jobs to locals, and not long after became the people's racetrack, a place to hone your skills as a driver no matter who you were. And that continues to this very day. Some of you watching have undoubtedly challenged the green hell in your own favorite car, or perhaps taken a ring taxi as a frightened passenger to some legendary German racing driver. But no matter who you are, a racing fan, a weekend track dayer, or a multi-billion-dollar automaker, the Nürburgring remains hallowed ground for anyone and everyone that loves cars. Thank you so much for watching. Do subscribe if you haven't already, and join us on Discord to tell us all about your favorite racing track and what video we should do next. I'll see you in the next one.